I never imagined I would spend my 35th birthday sitting in a courtroom, listening to a man in an expensive suit call me a gold digger in front of a judge. But there I was, my hands shaking as I clutched a worn manila folder against my chest, trying to remember how to breathe. My name is Rebecca Chen, and this is the story of how I lost everything I thought I knew about my life and found something I never expected to discover about myself. 6 months earlier, I was living what most people would call a comfortable life in suburban Connecticut. I had been married to Marcus Sterling for 9 years. We met when I was 25, fresh out of graduate school with a degree in art history and mountains of student debt. Marcus was 32, a rising star at a prestigious investment firm, charming and confident in ways I had never been. Our courtship felt like a fairy tale. He took me to gallery openings, expensive restaurants, weekend trips to Martha's Vineyard. He said he loved my passion for art, my intelligence, the way I could spend hours analyzing a single painting. When he proposed after 8 months, I said yes without hesitation. Marcus, Rebecca, you make me want to be a better person. Marry me. Me. Yes, of course, yes. The early years were good. We moved into a beautiful colonial house with a garden where I could paint on weekends. I got a job as a curator at a small museum in Hartford, work that I loved even though the salary was modest. Marcus's career continued to soar. Within 3 years, he made partner at his firm. But somewhere along the way, things shifted. The late nights at the office became later. The business trips became more frequent. When Marcus was home, he seemed distracted, always on his phone, always somewhere else in his mind. Me. Marcus, can we talk about maybe taking a vacation together? We haven't had a real trip in over a year. Marcus. Rebecca, this is a crucial time for my career. You know how important this is. I told myself it was just a phase. Every marriage goes through difficult periods. I threw myself deeper into my work at the museum. I took on extra projects, stayed late cataloging new acquisitions, organized exhibitions that drew modest but respectable crowds. Then came the day that split my life into before and after. It was a Tuesday evening in March. I came home early from the museum because of a migraine. The house was supposed to be empty. Marcus had said he was flying to Chicago for a client meeting, but his car was in the driveway. I found him in our bedroom with his assistant, a woman named Vanessa, who had joined his firm 6 months earlier. They were so absorbed in each other that they didn't hear me come up the stairs. I stood in the doorway for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only seconds. My body went cold, then hot, then numb. I don't remember the exact words I said. I remember Vanessa grabbing her clothes and running past me. I remember Marcus pulling on his pants, not meeting my eyes. Marcus. Rebecca. This isn't what you think. Me. How long? Marcus. It doesn't matter. It's over now. Me. How long, Marcus? Marcus. 8 months. 8 months. While I had been planning our anniversary dinner, choosing the perfect gift, talking to my sister about maybe finally trying to have a baby, he had been building an entire secret life. I left the house that night with one suitcase and my laptop. I went to my friend Diane's apartment downtown. She opened the door, took one look at my face, and pulled me inside without asking any questions. For the first week, I barely functioned. I called in sick to work. I slept 14 hours a day. When I was awake, I scrolled through years of photos on my phone, trying to pinpoint the exact moment everything went wrong, as if I could somehow change the outcome by identifying the precise instant of departure. Diane. Rebecca, you need to eat something. Me. I'm not hungry. Diane. You haven't eaten in 2 days. I'm not asking. She was the one who finally convinced me to see a lawyer. I didn't want to. Some part of me still hoped that maybe this could be fixed, that maybe Marcus would realize what he was throwing away. But Diane was insistent. Diane. Rebecca, listen to me. I love you, but you need to stop waiting for him to come to his senses. You need to protect yourself. The first lawyer I consulted was a kind woman named Patricia Huang, who specialized in family law. She had gentle eyes and a calm demeanor that made it slightly easier to discuss the most humiliating details of my failed marriage. Patricia. Rebecca, I need you to be completely honest with me. What assets did you bring into the marriage? Me. I had student debt. About $80,000. Marcus paid it off the year we got married. Patricia. And since then, have you worked? Me. Yes, The entire time. I'm an assistant curator at the Hartford Museum of Contemporary Art. Patricia. What's your annual salary? Me. $42,000. Patricia. And your husband's income? Me. Last year it was around $700,000, I think. Maybe more with bonuses. Patricia looked at me over her reading glasses. Patricia. Rebecca. Connecticut is an equitable distribution state. That means assets acquired during the marriage are divided fairly, not necessarily equally. You're entitled to a portion of the marital assets. Me. I don't want his money. I just want this to be over. Patricia. That's shock talking. In a few weeks, when you've had time to process, you're going to need to think practically about your future. I didn't believe her then. I couldn't imagine a version of myself who would fight Marcus for money. That wasn't who I was. I had always prided myself on being independent, self-sufficient, not the kind of woman who needed a man's wealth. But Patricia was patient. She walked me through the reality of my situation. My salary barely covered rent on a modest apartment. I had no savings of my own because all our money had gone into joint accounts that Marcus managed. My retirement fund was minuscule. Meanwhile, Marcus had accumulated significant wealth during our marriage. The divorce proceedings began in April. Marcus hired a high-powered attorney named Gerald Whitmore from a firm that specialized in protecting wealthy clients. From the first communication, Gerald's strategy was clear. Paint me as an opportunistic woman who had married Marcus for his money and was now trying to cash in on the divorce. It was absurd. When we married, Marcus had been successful, but not wealthy. His fortune had grown during our marriage, years when I had been his partner, hosting dinners for his clients, attending firm events, supporting his career while maintaining my own modest work. But Gerald was good at his job. He filed motions questioning my contributions to the marriage. He requested detailed accounting of every dollar I had spent from our joint accounts over 9 years. He even subpoenaed records from the museum where I worked, trying to prove that my job was essentially a hobby rather than real employment. Me. Patricia, they're making me sound like some kind of con artist. I loved Marcus. I thought we were building a life together. Patricia, I know. This is what high-conflict divorce looks like. They're trying to intimidate you into accepting less than you deserve. My life became consumed by the divorce. I spent evenings going through old bank statements, emails, photographs, anything that could document the life Marcus and I had built together. My work at the museum suffered. My boss, a wonderful woman named Dr. Eleanor Fitzpatrick, was understanding, but I could see the concern in her eyes. Dr. Fitzpatrick, Rebecca, take whatever time you need. Your position will be here when you're ready. Me. I'm so sorry. I'm trying to keep it together. Dr. Fitzpatrick, you're going through one of the hardest things a person can experience. Nobody expects you to be superhuman. The months crawled by. Summer came and went. Marcus and I had no direct contact. Everything went through the lawyers. I heard through mutual friends that he was openly dating Vanessa now, taking her to the same restaurants where we used to go, the same vacation spots we had visited. Each piece of news felt like another small death. During those months, I started seeing a therapist named Dr. Linda Morrison. I had resisted therapy initially, thinking I should be able to handle this on my own. But Diane practically dragged me to the first appointment, and I'm grateful she did. Dr. Sinam Morrison. Rebecca, tell me what brings you here today. Me. My husband cheated on me. We're getting divorced. His lawyer is trying to make me look like I married him for money. I can't sleep, I can't eat, and I don't recognize my own life anymore. Dr. Morrison. That's a lot to be carrying. No wonder you're struggling. Over the following weeks, Dr. Morrison helped me untangle the complicated emotions I was feeling. The grief over losing my marriage. The anger at Marcus's betrayal. The shame I felt about the divorce, as if it was somehow my failure. The fear about my financial future. The confusion about who I was if I wasn't Marcus's wife. Dr. Morrison. Rebecca, I notice you keep saying things like I should have seen it coming or I must have done something wrong. Can you hear how you're making yourself responsible for Marcus's choices? Me. But if I had been a better wife, maybe he wouldn't have strayed. Dr. Ino. Morrison. Or maybe Marcus made a choice that had nothing to do with your adequacy as a partner. You can't control other people's behavior. You can only control your response to it. That concept was revolutionary to me. For months, I had been torturing myself with what ifs. What if I had been more attentive? What if I had dressed differently, cooked better meals, been more interesting, less focused on my work? What if I had somehow been enough to keep him from wanting someone else? But Dr. Morrison helped me see that Marcus's infidelity was his choice, his failure, his character flaw, not mine. We also worked on my relationship with money and my difficulty asking for what I deserved in the divorce. Dr. Morrison, where do you think this resistance comes from? This idea that wanting financial security makes you greedy? Me. I was raised to believe that women who married for money were shallow, that real love meant not caring about finances. My parents struggled financially my whole childhood, but they were proud of never asking for help, never taking what wasn't earned through their own labor. Dr. Morrison, and you see asking for your share of marital assets as being like those women your parents warned you about? Me. I guess so. It feels mercenary, like I'm proving Gerald Whitmore right. Dr. Morrison, but you did earn it, Rebecca. Through 9 years of partnership, through professional sacrifices, through emotional labor, through all the ways you supported Marcus's success. That's not being a gold digger. That's claiming what you're legally and morally entitled to. Those therapy sessions were hard. I cried a lot. I got angry in ways I had never allowed myself to be angry before. I mourned the future I had planned, the children I had hoped to have with Marcus, the life we would never live together. But slowly I started to feel stronger. Not healed exactly, but more solid. Like I was remembering how to be a person instead of just a collection of pain and fear. I also started attending a support group for women going through divorce. Patricia had recommended it, and at first I was skeptical. I didn't want to sit in a circle talking about my feelings with strangers, but the group turned out to be invaluable. There were 8 of us, ranging in age from 28 to 63, all at different stages of divorce. Some were freshly separated, raw with shock. Others were years past their divorces, there to support the newer members and share what they had learned. The facilitator was a warm woman named Carol, who had been divorced herself 20 years earlier. Carol, this is a judgment-free space. Whatever you're feeling is valid. Anger, grief, relief, confusion, all of it. We're here to support each other through this transition. Hearing other women's stories helped me feel less alone. There was Natalie, whose husband had left her for a younger colleague, just like Marcus. There was Angela, who had been married for 32 years when her husband announced he wanted a divorce. There was Kim, who had initiated the divorce after years of her husband's emotional abuse. Each woman's story was different, but there were common threads: the shock of losing the life you thought you had, the fear about the future, the grief, the anger, the slow rebuilding of identity. Natalie. The hardest part for me is seeing them together on social media. He posts pictures with her at all our favorite places. It's like he's replacing me but keeping our life. Me. Marcus is doing the same thing. It's this special kind of torture, watching them build a life from the ashes of mine. Angela. It gets easier. I know that's hard to believe right now, but it does. Eventually you stop caring what he's doing. Eventually you build a life that's so full and satisfying that his choices become irrelevant. I clung to that promise during the dark days. That eventually I would stop caring. That eventually this pain would fade. The group also helped me prepare for the court hearing. Several women had been through similar experiences, contentious divorces where they had to fight for fair settlements. Kim, bring documentation of everything, every contribution you made, financial or otherwise. Bank statements, emails, anything that shows the reality of your marriage versus the story his lawyer will try to tell. Natalie, and practice staying calm when they attack you. Because they will attack you. That's their strategy, to make you look emotional and unreasonable so the judge doubts your credibility. Me. I don't know if I can stay calm. When I think about standing there while they call me names, I feel like I'm going to fall apart. Carol. Then practice. We can do role play here. I'll be the hostile lawyer, you practice responding calmly and firmly. It's like any other skill. You can get better at it with practice. So we practiced. Week after week, Carol would throw hostile questions at me while the other women watched and gave feedback. Carol. Ms. Chen, isn't it true that you were attracted to my client because of his wealth? Me. I was attracted to Marcus because of who he was as a person. His career success was impressive, but it wasn't why I fell in love with him. Kim. Good, but don't sound defensive. State it like a fact, not like you're arguing. We practiced until I could respond to the most hostile questions without my voice shaking, without tears, without visible emotion. It felt mechanical, almost like I was learning to play a role. But I knew it was necessary. The support group also celebrated small victories with me. When I successfully negotiated with Marcus about dividing our furniture. When I got through an entire day without crying. When I painted my first canvas in months. When I stood up to Marcus in an email instead of backing down the way I used to. These women became my lifeline during those months. They understood in ways that even Diane and Emma, as supportive as they were, couldn't quite grasp. They had been through it. They knew the specific pain of watching your marriage disintegrate while lawyers fought over who deserved what percentage of the life you had built together. In October, we finally got a court date. The judge would hear both sides and make determinations about asset division. Patricia prepped me carefully for what to expect. Patricia. Gerald is going to try to rattle you. He's going to ask invasive questions about your spending, your lifestyle, your motivations for marrying Marcus. Stay calm. Answer honestly. Don't let him make you angry. Me. What if I can't do this? What if I fall apart up there? Patricia. Then you fall apart. You're human. The judge will see that. The week before the court date, I barely slept. I ran through scenarios in my head, imagining all the ways Gerald would try to humiliate me. I practiced keeping my voice steady, my hands still, my face neutral. My sister Emma flew in from Seattle to be with me. Emma. Rebecca, you've got this. You're the strongest person I know. Me. I don't feel strong. I feel like I'm barely holding on. Emma. Strength isn't about not being scared. It's about doing the hard thing even when you're terrified. The morning of the hearing, I put on the most professional outfit I owned, a navy blue suit I had bought for job interviews years ago, simple black heels, minimal jewelry. I pulled my hair back in a neat bun. In the mirror, I looked like someone playing the role of a competent adult. The courthouse was imposing, all granite and marble and echoing hallways. Patricia met me at the entrance. She squeezed my hand. Patricia, remember what we talked about. Stay calm. Tell the truth. Let the evidence speak for itself. We walked into the courtroom together. It was smaller than I expected, less dramatic than the courtrooms on television. Marcus was already there with Gerald, sitting at the opposite table. He didn't look at me. For 9 years, this man had been the center of my world. Now we sat in the same room like strangers, like adversaries. The judge entered, a woman in her early 60s with steel gray hair and sharp eyes. Judge Marianne Foster. Patricia had told me she was known for being fair, but no nonsense. Judge Foster. Let's proceed. Mr. Whitmore, you may begin. Gerald stood, buttoning his jacket with the practiced ease of someone who had done this hundreds of times. He was exactly what you would imagine. Silver-haired, expensive suit, commanding presence. Gerald. Your Honor, this case is quite straightforward. My client, Marcus Sterling, is a self-made man who built a successful career through hard work and intelligence. He married the plaintiff when she was a recent graduate with substantial debt. He generously paid off that debt and provided her with a comfortable lifestyle for nearly a decade. Now, facing the end of this marriage, she seeks to claim half of assets that she had no role in creating. I felt my face flush hot. Patricia put a calming hand on my arm. Gerald, the evidence will show that Ms. Chen made minimal financial contributions to this marriage. Her salary was negligible compared to my client's income. She spent freely from their joint accounts on personal expenses, and now she seeks what amounts to a financial windfall from a marriage that she did not sustain through equal partnership. Judge Foster. Ms. Huang, your response? Patricia stood, her voice clear and steady. Patricia. Your Honor, the opposing counsel's characterization of my client is not only inaccurate but deeply offensive. Rebecca Chen is an educated professional who maintained full-time employment throughout her marriage. She supported her husband's career at every turn, often at the expense of her own professional advancement. Connecticut law recognizes that contributions to a marriage come in many forms, not merely financial. Ms. Chen is entitled to equitable distribution of marital assets, period. The judge nodded. Judge Foster. I'd like to hear from both parties directly. Mr. Sterling, please approach. Marcus walked to the witness stand. He looked older than I remembered, or maybe I was just seeing him clearly for the first time. Gerald questioned him about his career, his income, his version of our marriage. Gerald. Mr. Sterling, would you say your wife supported your career? Marcus. In the beginning, yes. She would attend events. But over the years, she became more focused on her own work. There were many important dinners and functions she skipped because of her museum obligations. It was such a careful revision of history. Yes, I had missed some events, but only because they conflicted with my own professional responsibilities. I had spent years rearranging my schedule to accommodate Marcus's needs. Gerald. And would you characterize her spending habits as frugal or extravagant? Marcus. She spent quite a bit on art supplies, classes, gallery memberships. Things that were hobbies rather than necessities. My art. The thing that kept me sane during the lonely years when Marcus was never home. Now, weaponized against me as evidence of frivolous spending. Judge Foster. Ms. Chen, your turn. My legs felt unsteady as I walked to the witness stand. I could feel everyone's eyes on me. I thought about what Emma had said. Courage isn't the absence of fear. Patricia walked me through the basics first. My education, my job, the timeline of our marriage. Then she asked about my contributions. Patricia. Ms. Chen, did you support your husband's career? Me. Yes. I hosted dinners for his clients and colleagues. I attended every firm event he asked me to attend. When he was stressed, I listened. When he was uncertain, I encouraged him. When he worked late, I made sure he had a home to come back to that was warm and welcoming. I thought that's what partners did for each other. Patricia. Did you pursue your own career advancement during your marriage? Me. I had opportunities to apply for positions at larger museums in New York and Boston. Better pay, more prestige. But Marcus didn't want to relocate, and I didn't want to commute hours each day and barely see him. So I stayed at the Hartford Museum. I told myself our marriage was more important than career advancement. Patricia. Do you believe you're entitled to a share of the marital assets? I hesitated. Even after all these months, part of me still recoiled from the idea of taking Marcus's money. But then I thought about the 9 years I had invested, the career opportunities I had passed up, the future I had to rebuild from scratch at 35. Me. Yes, I do. Not because I want to punish Marcus, but because I earned it. I was a full partner in our marriage, even if my contributions looked different from his. Patricia. Thank you. No further questions. Then it was Gerald's turn. He approached me with a slight smile that didn't reach his eyes. Gerald. Ms. Chen, you have a degree in art history, correct? Me. Yes. Gerald. And how much did your education cost? Me. With undergraduate and graduate school, about $80,000 in loans. Gerald. Which my client generously paid off. Me. Yes, he did. I was grateful. Gerald. And your current salary is $42,000 annually? Me. Yes. Gerald. That's quite modest compared to my client's income, wouldn't you say? Me. Our salaries were never equal, if that's what you're asking. Gerald. In fact, my client has earned approximately 18 times your salary in recent years. Me. I'm aware of the disparity. Gerald. Ms. Chen, isn't it true that you married my client knowing he was a high earner? Me. I married him because I loved him. Gerald. But you were aware of his financial status. Me. Of course. Just as he was aware that I was an art history graduate student with debt and limited earning potential. He said he admired my passion for art, my education, my values. He said those things mattered more than money. Gerald. And yet now you're seeking a substantial portion of his wealth. Me. I'm seeking what the law says I'm entitled to as his spouse of 9 years. Gerald paused, letting the tension build. Gerald. Ms. Chen, isn't it true that you've essentially been a gold digger who married for financial security and is now cashing out? The words hung in the air like a slap. I felt the blood drain from my face. Patricia shot to her feet. Patricia. Objection. Your Honor, this is outrageous. But before Judge Foster could respond, something inside me snapped. Not in anger, but in clarity. I had spent 6 months feeling ashamed, feeling like maybe I was wrong to ask for anything, feeling like I should just disappear quietly and let Marcus and Vanessa have their perfect life. But I wasn't wrong. I had given 9 years of my life to a partnership that I had honored completely. I had sacrificed and compromised and supported. I had earned my place in that marriage, and I had earned my share of what we built together. Me. No, that's not true. My voice was steady now, stronger than I expected. Me. I married Marcus when he was making a fraction of what he makes now. I loved him when he was stressed and uncertain about his career. I believed in him before he was a big success. And during our marriage, I worked full-time at a job I was passionate about, even though it didn't pay well. I could have pursued a more lucrative career. I could have pushed for the positions in New York or Boston that would have doubled or tripled my salary. But I chose to prioritize our life together. I chose to make our marriage work over my own advancement. That was my contribution, and it had value, even if it doesn't show up on a tax return. Gerald. Your Honor, this is just... Judge Foster held up her hand. Judge Foster. Mr. Whitmore, I'd like to hear what Ms. Chen has to say. Continue, Ms. Chen. I took a breath. Me. I'm not a gold digger. I'm a woman who believed in the promises of marriage. I believed that what's mine is yours, and what's yours is mine. I believed we were building something together. And when that fell apart, through no fault of my own, I believed I had the right to walk away with enough to rebuild my life. That's not opportunism, that's fairness. The courtroom was quiet. Judge Foster looked at me thoughtfully. Judge Foster. Ms. Chen, do you have documentation of your professional opportunities that you declined during your marriage? I glanced at Patricia. We had discussed this possibility, but I hadn't expected the judge to ask directly. Me. Yes, Your Honor, I have them with me. I reached for the manila folder I had been holding all morning. Inside were years of careful record-keeping that I had done almost without thinking about why. Emails from headhunters, job offers with salary ranges, notes from informational interviews at prestigious institutions. Judge Foster. I'd like to see those documents. I walked forward and handed the folder to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. My hands were shaking again, but differently this time. Not from fear, but from something like hope. Judge Foster opened the folder and began reading. The silence stretched out. I watched her face for any sign of reaction, but she remained impassive, professional. Finally, she looked up. Judge Foster. Mr. Whitmore, did you know about these opportunities your client's wife declined? Gerald. Your Honor, Judge Foster, I'm asking Mr. Sterling. Mr. Sterling, did you know your wife was approached for a position at the Metropolitan Museum of Art with a starting salary of $95,000? Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Marcus. I knew she had some interest from other museums. Judge Foster. Some interest. This is a formal offer letter, dated 4 years into your marriage. Did you encourage her to take this position? Marcus. We discussed it. I didn't think the commute would work for our lifestyle. Judge Foster. Your lifestyle. Ms. Chen, why didn't you accept this position? Me. Marcus and I agreed that the commute would be difficult. 3 hours each way. I would barely see him. We were talking about starting a family. It didn't seem like the right time. Judge Foster. And here's another offer, 2 years later, from the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. Salary of $105,000, housing assistance included. You didn't accept this either? Me. Marcus's firm was going through a major transition. He was up for partner. He needed me here, supporting him through that process. I told myself there would be other opportunities. Judge Foster looked at Marcus again. Judge Foster. Mr. Sterling, your wife turned down at least 3 significant career opportunities during your marriage, opportunities that would have substantially increased her earning potential. Did you view this as a sacrifice she was making for your marriage? Marcus. I suppose I didn't think about it that way. Judge Foster. You didn't think about it, Ms. Chen, according to these documents, over the course of your marriage, you turned down positions that would have put your cumulative earnings somewhere around $300,000 higher than what you actually earned. Is that correct? Patricia. Your Honor, we calculated it at approximately $280,000, accounting for taxes and realistic salary growth. Judge Foster. $280,000 in foregone income to support a marriage that your husband subsequently ended through infidelity. Gerald stood quickly. Gerald. Your Honor, the reason for the marriage dissolution is not relevant to asset division. Judge Foster. In Connecticut, Mr. Whitmore, we consider all relevant factors when determining equitable distribution. Ms. Chen's professional sacrifices and their financial impact are absolutely relevant. So is the fact that she maintained consistent employment and supported the household in multiple ways. She closed the folder and looked directly at Gerald. Judge Foster. Mr. Whitmore, I find your characterization of Ms. Chen as a gold digger to be not only inaccurate but frankly offensive. The evidence before me shows a woman who worked throughout her marriage, who sacrificed significant professional opportunities for the benefit of that marriage, and who is now seeking a fair portion of assets that were accumulated during that partnership. That's not opportunism. That's equitable distribution under Connecticut law. I felt tears spring to my eyes, but I blinked them back. Patricia squeezed my hand under the table. Judge Foster. I'm going to order a full accounting of marital assets. Based on what I've seen today, I'm inclined to award Ms. Chen a substantial share, likely in the range of 40 to 45% of total marital assets accumulated during the marriage. We'll reconvene in 30 days with complete financial documentation from both parties. She banged her gavel. Judge Foster. Court is adjourned. I sat there for a moment, unable to move. Patricia was talking to me, but I couldn't hear her over the rushing in my ears. Across the courtroom, Gerald was packing up his briefcase with sharp, angry movements. Marcus still wouldn't look at me. We filed out into the hallway. Emma was waiting there, and when she saw my face, she ran to me. Emma. What happened? Are you okay? Me. I think I won. Patricia. You absolutely won. That was one of the most satisfying courtroom moments I've had in 20 years of practice. The next 30 days were a blur of paperwork and negotiations. Gerald tried to push back, to minimize the asset division, but Patricia was relentless. The judge's ruling had set the tone, and we had momentum on our side. Marcus and I met once, briefly, in a conference room with our lawyers present. It was the first time we had been in the same room since the courthouse. Marcus. Rebecca, I never meant for it to be like this. Me. How did you think it would be? Marcus. I don't know. I just thought maybe we could be civil about it. Me. You thought I would quietly accept being called a gold digger and walk away with nothing? He had the grace to look ashamed. Marcus. Gerald got carried away. That's not what I think of you. Me. It doesn't matter what you think of me anymore, Marcus. What matters is what's fair. We signed the final agreement in December just before Christmas. The settlement was better than I had dared to hope. 43% of marital assets, which translated to enough money that I could buy a modest condo, pay off the remnants of my student loans that Marcus's initial payment hadn't covered, and have a substantial cushion while I figured out my next steps. The day we signed felt surreal. Marcus and I sat at opposite ends of a long conference table, our lawyers between us, signing page after page of documents that officially ended our marriage. When it was done, Patricia shook my hand firmly. Patricia. Congratulations, Rebecca. You fought hard for this. Marcus wouldn't look at me as he left. Vanessa was waiting for him in the lobby, and I watched through the window as they walked away together, his arm around her shoulders. For a moment, I felt a sharp pang of something like regret. Then it passed. I went to Diane's apartment afterward. She had champagne waiting, and she insisted on toasting my new beginning. Diane. To Rebecca, who stood up for herself and won. Me. It doesn't feel like winning. It feels like surviving. Diane. Sometimes surviving is winning. You didn't let them break you. That counts for everything. The financial settlement changed my life in practical ways that I hadn't fully anticipated. For the first time since my early 20s, I didn't have to worry constantly about money. I could afford good groceries instead of the cheapest options. I could replace my worn-out winter coat without guilt. I could save for the future instead of living paycheck to paycheck. But more importantly, the settlement validated something I had needed to believe. That my contributions to the marriage had value. That I deserved to walk away with enough to build a new life. That I wasn't wrong for fighting for myself. More importantly, I won back something I had lost during the marriage, my sense of my own value. The money was nice, yes, I won't pretend it didn't make a massive difference in my life. But what mattered more was standing in that courtroom and refusing to accept someone else's diminished version of who I was. I spent the winter months settling into my new reality. The divorce support group helped me navigate the practical challenges, changing my name back to my maiden name on all my accounts, updating my will, figuring out how to file taxes as a single person for the first time in nearly a decade. But they also helped me with the emotional challenges. The loneliness of coming home to an empty apartment after years of marriage. The strange freedom of making decisions without consulting anyone else. The grief that would hit at unexpected moments. Seeing a couple holding hands, hearing a song that Marcus and I used to love, passing by the restaurant where we had celebrated our 5th anniversary. Angela, from the support group, told me something that stuck with me. Angela, grief isn't linear. You're going to have good days and bad days. Sometimes you'll feel strong and confident and ready to move forward. Sometimes you'll feel like you're right back at the beginning, broken and lost. Both are normal. Both are part of healing. She was right. I had days where I felt powerful, where I looked at my new condo and my growing savings account and my rekindled creative practice and thought, I've got this. Then I had days where I couldn't get out of bed, where everything felt pointless, where I wondered if I would ever feel whole again. Dr. Morrison helped me understand that healing wasn't about reaching some final destination where I would be completely over the divorce. It was about learning to carry what had happened as part of my story, rather than the defining feature of my identity. Dr. Morrison, you're not a divorced woman. You're a woman who has experienced divorce, among many other experiences that have shaped you. It's one chapter, not the whole book. I started thinking about what I wanted my next chapter to look like. What did I actually want, when I wasn't trying to live up to anyone else's expectations or fit into anyone else's vision of what my life should be? I spent the spring rebuilding my life. I bought a small condo in Hartford with big windows and good light for painting. I threw myself back into my work at the museum with renewed energy. Dr. Fitzpatrick promoted me to associate curator, with a corresponding pay increase. Dr. Yarnby Fitzpatrick, Rebecca, you've been through hell this year, but you've come out stronger. That resilience shows in your work. Me, thank you for believing in me when I wasn't sure I believed in myself. I started painting again, something I had gradually stopped doing during my marriage. Marcus had never explicitly discouraged it, but somehow his presence, his needs, his schedule had slowly crowded out the time I needed for my own creativity. Now, on weekends, I would set up my easel by the window and lose myself in color and form. It felt like reclaiming a part of myself I had forgotten existed. The paintings I created during this period were raw and honest, reflecting the full spectrum of my emotional journey. Dark, turbulent pieces when I was working through anger. Soft, melancholic landscapes when I was grieving. Bright, chaotic abstracts when I was rediscovering joy. I joined a local artist collective, a group of women who met twice a month to paint together and critique each other's work. It was intimidating at first, showing my art to strangers, making myself vulnerable in yet another way. But the women were supportive and insightful, pushing me to take more risks, to trust my instincts, to stop second-guessing every creative choice. One of the artists, a sculptor named Teresa, became a close friend. She had gone through her own divorce 5 years earlier and understood the specific grief of losing not just a partner, but an entire vision of your future. Teresa, you know what I love about your recent work? You're not trying to make it pretty anymore. You're letting it be messy and complicated and real. Me, is that a compliment? Teresa, it's the highest compliment. Pretty is easy. Real is brave. I had a small solo show at a local gallery that spring, a collection of 12 paintings I had created over the previous 6 months. I called the exhibition Breaking Open, and I wrote in the artist statement about using art as a way to process loss and transformation. The opening reception was both thrilling and terrifying. About 50 people came, including colleagues from the museum, members of my divorce support group, Emma, who flew in from Seattle, and even Dr. Morrison, my therapist. Standing in that gallery, surrounded by my work, I felt simultaneously exposed and powerful. Several paintings sold that night. A woman I didn't know bought one of the darker pieces, a canvas dominated by deep blues and blacks, with a single streak of gold cutting through the center. Woman, this painting speaks to me. I'm going through something difficult right now, and seeing this reminds me that there's still light, even when everything feels dark. Me. That's exactly what I was trying to capture. Thank you for seeing it. After the show, Emma and I went out for drinks, just the two of us. Emma. Rebecca, I'm so proud of you. Not just the art, though that's incredible, but everything you've done this year. The way you fought for yourself, the way you've rebuilt your life, the way you're creating again. You're inspiring. Me. I don't feel inspiring. Most days I still feel like I'm barely holding it together. Emma. That's what makes it inspiring. You're doing it anyway, even when it's hard, even when you're scared. That's courage. Diane came over one Saturday afternoon and found me covered in paint, working on a large abstract canvas in shades of coral and gold. Diane. Look at you. You're glowing. Me. I'm covered in cadmium red and probably have paint in my hair. Diane. That's not what I mean. You look happy. Actually happy, not just pretending. She was right. Somewhere in the process of fighting for myself, of refusing to accept someone else's story about who I was, I had found something I hadn't even known I was looking for. Contentment in my own company, pride in my own accomplishments, joy in my own interests. In April, I got a call from the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. They had an opening for a senior curator position, focusing on contemporary Asian American artists. Would I be interested in interviewing? A year ago, I would have automatically said no. I would have found reasons why it wouldn't work, why I should stay small and safe and comfortable. But I wasn't that person anymore. Me. Yes, I'd be very interested. The interview process was rigorous. 3 rounds, presentations to the board, meetings with various department heads. But I walked into each one confident in my expertise, in my vision, in what I could contribute. They offered me the position in June. The salary was $130,000, more than 3 times what I had been making at Hartford. The role was prestigious, challenging, exactly the kind of opportunity I had spent years telling myself I wasn't quite ready for. I called Emma first. Emma. Rebecca, that's incredible. Are you going to take it? Me. I think so. It's scary. It's a big change. But when I think about saying no, I realize I'd only be saying no out of fear, not out of any real reason. Emma. You've already survived the scariest thing. This is just the next adventure. I accepted the position. Dr. Fitzpatrick threw me a going-away party at the museum. My colleagues gave me a beautiful set of professional art supplies and a card filled with warm messages. Dr. Fitzpatrick, you're going to do amazing things in Boston. But know that you always have a home here if you ever want to come back. Me. Thank you for everything. Seriously, you kept me afloat when I was drowning. I moved to Boston in August. The museum helped me find an apartment in Cambridge, a converted loft with exposed brick and enormous windows. I filled it with my paintings, my books, furniture. I chose myself based purely on what I liked, not what fit someone else's aesthetic. My first day at the new job was terrifying and exhilarating. The museum was massive compared to Hartford. The resources were extensive. The expectations were high. But I was ready. The team I inherited was talented, but directionless. The previous curator had left abruptly, and morale was low. I spent the first few weeks just listening, understanding their concerns, learning what they needed from leadership. Then I started making changes. We restructured how we approached exhibitions. We prioritized emerging artists alongside established names. We created community partnerships to make the museum more accessible to local Asian American communities who had often felt excluded from these spaces. Within 3 months, we had secured funding for a major exhibition that would travel to museums across the country. Within 6 months, our visitor numbers were up by 30%. Within a year, we won a national award for innovative programming. My boss, the museum director, called me into her office one morning. Director, Rebecca, I want you to know how impressed we are with what you've accomplished in such a short time. Me. Thank you. I have an amazing team. They just needed support and direction. Director, it's more than that. You have a vision and you're not afraid to fight for it. That's rare. I thought about how different I was from the woman who had sat in that courtroom 2 years earlier, shaking and uncertain. Fighting for myself in the divorce had taught me how to fight for other things too. My vision, my team, my beliefs about what art could do in the world. I still had hard days. Divorce doesn't just end, it echoes through your life in unexpected ways. Sometimes I would see a couple laughing together in a coffee shop and feel a pang of loss for what I had hoped my marriage would be. Sometimes I would wake up in the middle of the night, anxious about money despite my secure financial situation now, unable to shake the vulnerability I had felt during those months of uncertainty. But those moments became less frequent over time, and increasingly, they were balanced by moments of genuine joy. Finishing a difficult painting, seeing a young artist's face light up when their work was selected for an exhibition, having dinner with new friends I had made in Boston, calling Emma and hearing the excitement in her voice when I told her about my latest project. One afternoon, I was at the museum working on plans for an upcoming exhibition when I got an email from Patricia, my divorce lawyer. We had stayed in touch occasionally, the way you do with someone who has seen you at your most vulnerable. Patricia. Rebecca, I hope you're well. I'm reaching out because I have a client going through a difficult divorce, and she reminds me a lot of you. She's scared and uncertain, and doesn't believe she deserves to fight for herself. I wondered if you might be willing to talk to her, share your experience. No pressure, but I thought it might help. I thought about it for a long time before responding. Going back to that emotional space, even briefly, even to help someone else, felt daunting. But then I remembered how alone I had felt during my divorce. How much it would have meant to talk to someone who had been through it and come out the other side. Me, Patricia. I'd be happy to talk to her, give her my email address. Her name was Jennifer. She reached out a few days later with a tentative email asking if we could meet for coffee. I suggested a place near the museum, a quiet cafe with good lighting and comfortable chairs. Jennifer arrived right on time, a woman in her early 40s with tired eyes and nervous hands. I recognized everything about her: the careful outfit chosen to look put together, the wedding ring she was still wearing, the way she apologized for taking up my time before she had even sat down. Jennifer, thank you so much for meeting me. Patricia said you went through something similar. Me. I did. About 2 years ago now. It was the hardest thing I've ever experienced. Jennifer, how did you get through it? I thought about all the ways I could answer that question. I could talk about the legal strategy, the documentation, the specific steps of the divorce process. But that wasn't really what she was asking. Me. I stopped believing the story my husband and his lawyer wanted to tell about who I was. I started believing my own story instead. That sounds simple, but it was the hardest work I've ever done. Jennifer, his lawyer keeps saying I'm just after his money, but I worked too. I raised our kids. I moved 3 times for his career. I turned down jobs. I put my life on hold. Doesn't that count for something? Me. It counts for everything. And the law recognizes that, even when your husband's lawyer tries to pretend it doesn't. We talked for over 2 hours. I told her about my experience in court, about the moment when Gerald called me a gold digger and how close I came to just crumbling. I told her about the folder of documents that proved my professional sacrifices and how sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply show the truth. Jennifer, what if I can't do it? What if I'm not strong enough? Me. You are strong enough. You're sitting here asking for help, trying to figure out how to protect yourself. That's strength. You don't have to be fearless. You just have to keep moving forward even when you're afraid. When we parted ways, Jennifer hugged me tightly. Jennifer, thank you. Really. This helped more than you know. Watching her walk away, I felt something shift inside me. My divorce, as painful as it had been, had given me something valuable. Perspective on resilience, on self-worth, on the importance of fighting for yourself even when it's terrifying. I started volunteering with a local organization that provided support and resources for women going through divorce. Once a month, I would lead a workshop on financial literacy and asset protection. I shared my story, the mistakes I had made, the things I had done right, the lessons I had learned. It was healing in a way I hadn't expected. Each time I told my story, it became less a wound and more a narrative of transformation. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was a survivor, and then more than that, I was someone who was thriving. In the spring of my 3rd year in Boston, I organized a major exhibition called Reconstructed: Asian American Women Artists Responding to Loss. It featured works by 20 artists exploring themes of divorce, death, displacement, and rebuilding. The emotional resonance was powerful. Visitors spent hours in the galleries, often returning multiple times. One of the artists, a sculptor named Mei Zhang, created a piece using fragments of a broken mirror reassembled into a new form. It was beautiful and painful and hopeful all at once. Mei, I made this right after my divorce. I wanted to capture how you're shattered, but you're also creating something new from the pieces. You're still you, just reconfigured. Me. That's exactly it. You don't go back to who you were before. You become someone new. The exhibition traveled to 5 other museums across the country. I traveled with it, giving talks about the work and the themes. Everywhere I went, women would approach me afterward, thanking me for creating space for these difficult conversations. One woman in her 60s came up to me after a presentation in Seattle. Woman. I got divorced 30 years ago, and I've never really processed what it meant to lose that life I had planned. Seeing this work, hearing you talk about reconstruction rather than recovery, it gave me a new way to think about my own story. Me. It's never too late to rewrite how you understand your own life. On my 38th birthday, Emma flew out to visit me in Boston. We spent the day at the museum, then went back to my apartment for dinner. I cooked pasta while she opened wine, and we caught up on everything. Emma, Rebecca, I have to tell you something. Watching what you've done over the past few years, how you've rebuilt your entire life, it gave me the courage to leave my own bad relationship. I kept thinking if you could survive what you went through and come out stronger, I could handle my situation too. Me. Emma, I didn't know you were unhappy. Emma. I wasn't sure I was allowed to be unhappy. It wasn't dramatic like yours. No cheating, no big betrayal. Just slow suffocation, you know? But you showed me that you don't have to wait for something catastrophic to give yourself permission to want more. We stayed up late that night, talking about everything we had learned about ourselves, about relationships, about what we actually wanted from our lives versus what we thought we were supposed to want. Emma, do you think you'll ever want to get married again? Me. I honestly don't know. I'm not closed to the idea, but I'm also really happy with my life as it is. I don't feel incomplete the way I used to think I would if I wasn't part of a couple. Emma. That's growth right there. Over the next year, I dated occasionally. Nothing serious, nothing that swept me off my feet. I went out with a nice architect who talked too much about himself. I had a brief relationship with a fellow curator at another museum that ended amicably when we both realized we wanted different things. I went on a memorably terrible blind date set up by well-meaning friends. But I wasn't desperate or anxious the way I might have been before the divorce. I knew now that being alone was vastly preferable to being with the wrong person. I had learned that my own company was actually pretty great. I had work I loved, friends who mattered to me, creative projects that fulfilled me, financial security I had fought for and earned. Sometimes I would think about Marcus. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he had married Vanessa in a small ceremony. Part of me felt a twinge of something, not quite jealousy, but a kind of melancholy for the life I had once imagined we would have. But mostly I felt grateful that the divorce had happened when it did. Before we had children who would have been caught in the middle, before I had spent another decade supporting someone who didn't value my contributions, before I was 40 or 50 and even more entrenched in a life that wasn't truly mine. One afternoon, I was at a coffee shop near the museum, working on a grant proposal, when someone approached my table. Person. Rebecca? Rebecca Chen? I looked up to see a woman about my age with kind eyes and a warm smile. She looked familiar, but I couldn't place her. Me. Yes, that's me. Person. I'm Sarah Patel. We were in graduate school together, art history program at Columbia. It clicked. Sarah and I had been friendly during our graduate years, though we had lost touch after graduation. Sarah. I heard you were in Boston. I'm an associate professor at Harvard now, in the art history department. I've been following your work at the museum. The reconstructed exhibition was incredible. Me. Thank you. That means a lot, especially coming from you. We ended up talking for over an hour, catching up on the past 15 years, discussing our respective work, sharing insights about the art world. Sarah was brilliant, still as passionate about art as she had been in graduate school. Sarah. We're actually organizing a symposium next month on contemporary Asian American art. Would you be interested in being on a panel? I think your perspective would be valuable. Me. I'd love that. The symposium was excellent, engaging discussions with scholars and artists I admired. Afterward, Sarah and I grabbed dinner with a few other panelists. The conversation ranged from art theory to department politics to the challenges of work-life balance in academia and museum work. One of the other panelists, a professor named David Lin, was charming and funny, with an impressive knowledge of contemporary sculpture. We ended up in a long discussion about the use of industrial materials in art, trading references, and debating interpretations. David, I have to say, your work on the reconstructed exhibition really challenged some of my assumptions about narrative in contemporary art. Me. That's the highest compliment you could give me. Challenging assumptions is kind of the point. As the evening wound down, David asked if I'd like to get coffee sometime to continue the conversation. I surprised myself by saying yes immediately, without the overthinking and anxiety that had characterized my earlier attempts at dating. We met for coffee the following week, then dinner the week after that, then a walk through a sculpture garden. David was easy to be with, intellectually stimulating without being competitive, interested in my work without being threatened by my success. But I also wasn't rushing anything. I had learned patience, the value of taking time to really know someone before making assumptions about a future together. Sarah became a close friend over the following months. She was one of those rare people who was genuinely excited about other people's successes, who celebrated wins without envy. We started meeting regularly to discuss potential collaborations between the museum and the university. Sarah. Rebecca, have you ever thought about teaching? I think you'd be excellent in a classroom. Me. I don't know. My degree is in art history, not education. Sarah. You have over a decade of professional experience. That counts for more than another degree. Plus, you're already teaching every time you give a public lecture or lead a workshop. This would just formalize it. The idea intrigued me. I started teaching a seminar as an adjunct professor at Harvard. Contemporary Art and Social Justice. The students were brilliant and challenging, pushing me to articulate ideas I had been working with intuitively. One student, a young woman named Priya, stayed after class one day. Priya. Professor Chen. I wanted to ask about something you said in your lecture about using personal experience in curatorial work. How do you balance being professional with being vulnerable? Me. That's such a good question. I think vulnerability is actually a form of strength, especially when you're doing work about difficult subjects. My own experience with divorce, with loss, with having to rebuild myself, that's informed how I think about art that deals with those themes. I don't hide that. But I also don't center myself in a way that takes away from the artist's work. Priya. That's really helpful. I'm actually working through some difficult family stuff, and I've been worried that it makes me less professional or less serious as a scholar. Me. It makes you human. And human experience is what art is all about. As my 4th year in Boston began, I realized that I had built a life that felt genuinely mine. Not the life I had planned when I married Marcus at 26, not the life I had imagined during those dark months after the divorce, but a life that fit me, that challenged me, that allowed me to use all of my skills and passions and hard-won wisdom. The museum promoted me to chief curator, a position that came with a significant pay raise and much more responsibility. I was overseeing a team of 8 curators, managing a multi-million-dollar acquisitions budget, working directly with the director on strategic planning. My parents came to visit when I got the promotion. They took me out for a celebratory dinner at a fancy restaurant in Boston's North End. Dad. Rebecca, we're so proud of you. Look at everything you've accomplished. Mom. When you called us about the divorce, we were so worried. We didn't know if you would be okay. Me. I didn't know if I would be okay either, but it turned out that falling apart was the first step to building something better. David and I had been seeing each other for almost 6 months by then, taking it slow but steady. He met my parents at that dinner, and I was struck by how natural it felt to introduce him, how little anxiety I had about their approval or his performance. This was different from my relationship with Marcus. With Marcus, everything had felt urgent, like I needed to lock down this successful, handsome man before he realized I wasn't enough for him. With David, there was ease, a sense that we were both choosing each other from a place of wholeness rather than need. David. Your parents are lovely. Your dad told me about your art, how you used to paint when you were a kid. Me. God, what stories did he share? David. Just that you were always creative, always seeing the world a little differently. He's clearly very proud of you. Me. It took me a long time to be proud of myself. I spent years thinking that my value came from being successful in someone else's terms. The divorce forced me to figure out what success meant to me. David. And what does it mean to you now? Me. Doing work that matters. Having relationships that are honest and reciprocal. Being able to sleep at night knowing I didn't compromise my values. Using whatever platform I have to make space for artists who haven't traditionally had access to these institutions. David. That's beautiful and terrifying in its clarity. Me. The clarity is new. I used to be much more confused about what I wanted. That winter, I was invited to speak at a national conference for museum professionals. The topic was leadership and resilience in cultural institutions. I spent weeks preparing my talk, trying to find the right balance between personal story and professional insight. Standing on that stage in front of 300 of my peers, I told them about my divorce. I told them about being called a gold digger in court. I told them about the folder of documents that proved my sacrifices. And then I connected it to leadership, to the importance of knowing your value, to the necessity of fighting for what you've earned even when others try to diminish your contributions. The response was overwhelming. People lined up afterward to talk to me, to share their own stories of professional setbacks and personal challenges, to thank me for being honest about the messy reality behind the polished resume. One woman, a director of a small museum in Texas, grabbed my hands. Museum director. Thank you for saying that. I went through a divorce 3 years ago, and I've been hiding it like it was something shameful. But you're right. The strength it takes to survive that, to rebuild, that makes us better leaders, not worse ones. Me. Exactly. Our scars are proof of our resilience. On the flight home, I thought about how far I had come from that woman in the courtroom, shaking and uncertain. I thought about all the versions of myself I had been. The hopeful bride, the supportive wife, the devastated divorcee, the fighter, the survivor, the professional, the teacher, the curator, the leader. All of those versions were part of me, layers that had accumulated to create who I was now. Not despite the pain I had experienced, but because of how I had chosen to respond to it. When I got home, there was a letter waiting for me. It was from Jennifer, the woman I had met for coffee 2 years earlier when she was going through her divorce. Jennifer. Dear Rebecca, I wanted to update you on my life. The divorce was finalized 6 months ago. It was every bit as hard as you warned me it would be, but I fought for myself the way you encouraged me to. I got a fair settlement. More importantly, I got my self-respect back. I've gone back to school to finish my degree. I'm working part-time at a nonprofit I care about. My kids are adjusting, and I'm learning how to be happy on my own terms. Thank you for showing me that was possible. I put the letter on my refrigerator, next to photos of Emma's kids and postcards from artist friends, and a sketch I had done of the Boston skyline from my apartment window. All the pieces of my new life, assembled not according to some predetermined plan, but according to what felt true and right, and mine. David and I talked about moving in together. It was a big step, one that required me to really examine my fears and patterns. Was I ready to share space with someone again? Was I falling into old habits of compromise and self-diminishment? But this felt different. David had his own career, his own friends, his own life. He wasn't asking me to shrink to fit his needs. He was interested in how we could build something together, while both maintaining our individual identities. Me. I need to be honest with you about something. I'm scared. Not of you specifically, but of losing myself again the way I did in my marriage. David. I appreciate you telling me that. I don't want you to lose yourself either. If me living here means you feel like you can't paint or have space or be fully yourself, then it's not worth it. Me. What if we try it and it doesn't work? David. Then we figure it out. But Rebecca, you're not the same person you were when you married Marcus. You know yourself better now. You know what you need. I trust you to tell me if something isn't working. We decided to try living together. David moved into my apartment with his books and his coffee maker and his terrible taste in decorative pillows that we good-naturedly argued about. It was an adjustment, learning to share space again, to negotiate whose turn it was to do dishes, whose work crisis took priority on any given week. But it was also lovely. coming home to someone who was genuinely interested in my day, having someone to bounce ideas off of when I was stuck on an exhibition concept, waking up next to someone who saw me fully, flaws and all, and chose to be there anyway. One night, we were cooking dinner together, and David asked me something that stopped me cold. David, do you think you've forgiven Marcus? I had to really think about that. Me. I don't know if forgive is the right word. I've stopped being angry at him, which is different. I'm grateful, actually, for how things turned out. If he hadn't blown up our marriage, I might have stayed in that comfortable misery for decades. I might never have pushed myself to take risks, to fight for what I deserved, to build this life I have now. David. That's very evolved of you. Me. It took me a long time to get here. There were a lot of years where I was just angry and hurt and confused. But holding on to that was exhausting. At some point, I realized the best revenge wasn't making him suffer. It was building a life so good that his betrayal became just one chapter in a much longer, much better story. In the spring of my 5th year in Boston, I got an unexpected email from Patricia, my divorce lawyer. She was organizing a panel discussion for a legal conference about complex asset division and divorces, and she wanted me to be one of the speakers, representing the client perspective. Patricia. I think it would be powerful for lawyers to hear directly from someone who went through this process. You could share what was helpful, what was harmful, what you wish had been different. I agreed, though the prospect of talking to a room full of divorce lawyers about my personal experience was daunting. But I had learned that speaking truth, even uncomfortable truth, was how we create change. The panel was enlightening. I talked about the dehumanizing aspects of the legal process, the way financial discovery can feel invasive, the importance of lawyers remembering that their clients are people in crisis, not just cases to be won or lost. Me. When Marcus's lawyer called me a gold digger in court, it wasn't just insulting. It was an attempt to reduce my entire identity to a single ugly caricature. And the thing is, that kind of rhetoric is common in contentious divorces. We need to find ways to fight hard for our clients without destroying their humanity or the humanity of the opposing party. One young lawyer approached me afterward. Young lawyer, Ms. Chen, thank you for sharing that. I just finished law school and I'm about to start at a firm that does a lot of family law. I want to be the kind of lawyer who remembers that real people are involved, not just assets to be divided. Me. Good. We need more lawyers like that. And remember, your job is to advocate, but you can advocate fiercely without being cruel. Looking back now, 6 years after that day in court when Gerald Whitmore called me a gold digger, I can see the entire arc of my transformation. I can see how that moment, as painful as it was, became a catalyst for me to fight for myself in a way I never had before. I'm 41 now. I'm the chief curator at a major museum. I'm an adjunct professor. I have a partner who respects me and challenges me and makes me laugh. I have friendships that nourish me. I have work that matters. I have enough money that I sleep soundly at night, not because I'm wealthy, but because I know I can take care of myself. Most importantly, I have a bone-deep certainty about my own value that no one can take away from me. Not a hostile lawyer, not an unfaithful partner, not a judgmental society that sometimes still views divorced women with suspicion or pity. I earned every bit of what I fought for in that divorce. Not just the financial settlement, though that was important and fair and just, but also the knowledge that I could advocate for myself even when it was terrifying. That I could stand up and say, this is what I deserve, this is what I contributed, this is what I'm owed, and not back down even when powerful people tried to shame me into silence. My divorce didn't break me. It revealed to me how strong I had always been, under all those layers of accommodation and compromise and trying to be the perfect supportive wife. Sometimes, late at night when David is asleep beside me and the city lights filter through our bedroom window, I think about the woman I was 6 years ago. The one who was so afraid of being called a gold digger that she almost walked away from what she had rightfully earned. The one who was so conditioned to make herself smaller that she had forgotten her own size. I wish I could go back and tell her that everything was going to be okay. Better than okay. I wish I could tell her that the pain she was feeling was temporary, but the strength she was going to discover was permanent. But maybe she had to go through all of it, every difficult moment, every humiliation, every triumph, to become the person I am now. Maybe there are no shortcuts through that kind of transformation. I keep the manila folder from that day in court in my desk drawer at the museum. Sometimes, when I'm facing a difficult decision or a challenging negotiation, I take it out and look through the documents inside. The job offers I turned down, the opportunities I sacrificed, the proof of my value that I once needed a judge to validate. I don't need that validation anymore. I know what I'm worth, regardless of what anyone else thinks or says. And that knowledge, more than any settlement or salary or professional achievement, is the real gift that came from the worst experience of my life. When people ask me now about my divorce, I tell them the truth. It was the hardest thing I ever went through, and I wouldn't change a single moment of it. Because that pain carved out space in me for strength and wisdom and self-knowledge that I never would have found any other way. My divorce taught me that sometimes the only way to build the life you want is to let the life you planned fall completely apart. That sometimes being called names is the price of fighting for what you deserve. That documentation and preparation and the willingness to stand up for yourself can make all the difference between being victimized and being vindicated. But most of all, it taught me that I had always been valuable. Not because of who I was married to, not because of my professional achievements, not because of any external validation, but simply because I was myself, with all my flaws and strengths and complicated humanity. That realization, born in a courtroom on the day someone tried to reduce me to a stereotype, has informed everything I've done since. How I lead my team at the museum, treating every person with the respect and dignity they deserve. How I teach my students, encouraging them to fight for their ideas even when faced with skepticism. How I show up in my relationship with David as a whole person rather than half of something incomplete. And how I try to help other women going through similar struggles, showing them through my example that it is possible to emerge from devastation, not just intact but improved. Not just surviving but thriving. Not just enduring, but truly living. The judge asked to see my documents that day because she recognized what Marcus and his lawyer wanted me to forget. That my contributions had value, that my sacrifices counted, that my worth was not determined by my salary, but by the totality of what I brought to the partnership. Those documents changed the trajectory of my life. But the real change happened when I decided to show up and fight for myself. Even when I was terrified, even when it would have been easier to just accept less than I deserved and walk away quietly. I didn't walk away quietly. I stood up. I spoke my truth. I refused to accept someone else's diminished version of my story. And in doing so, I became more fully myself than I had ever been before. That's the woman I am now. Not despite what happened to me, but because of what I chose to do with what happened to me. And that makes all the difference.